Welcome to CBS Radio. I'm sitting with Charlayne Hunter-Gault. I wish I could start and say, this is who you are. All of the awards, and there's a whole series of those as a journalist. But you know what? I'm amazed on your background, on who you are and where you came from. If I take you back to, is it 1961 when you were the first African-American admitted, was the University of Georgia?
First African-American woman.
I'm a father of 4 girls, and I regularly spend a lot of time explaining what's important to them, because it seems the world doesn't do that very well. And yet I try to imagine your life. It's 1961. You're the first African-American woman that's ever accepted into that place. Can you tell me about that?
You know, from a very young age, I had a wonderful grandmother who had to drop out of school when she was 3 years old to help her single-parent mother survive. And although she dropped out of 3rd grade, she loved education, and she educated herself. And by the time I was aware, she was reading 3 newspapers a day. And she loved sports, and she loved news. And I used to sit at her feet waiting for the comic pages to drop. And I fell in love with the comic strip character Brenda Starr. I wanted to be Brenda Starr, ace reporter. And so in the end, and I'll make the story short, University of Georgia was the only school in the state by the time I got to high school graduation that offered a journalism school, but it was all white. And of course, this was the beginning of this was what Brown decision that desegregated, ordered desegregation was 1954. This was already 1959. So with the help of some of the more progressive people in Atlanta, Hamilton Holmes, my high school classmate, and I applied. He wanted to be a medical doctor, and the state of Georgia had the best facilities at the university. And of course, our parents' taxes paid for these things. So we almost routinely applied. And then there was a 1.5-year court battle, and finally the entry. And
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but you put this like, well, we just routinely apply, well, and then there's the court battle. I mean, you don't understand. Is that that's not something that any of us have really had to deal with, but you did, and you're just this kid at the time.
Well, but it was also the time of Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, and young people all over the South were taking their lives into their own hands. So for me, this wasn't any big deal. I had friends, high school classmates who were now in college, who were actually putting their bodies on the line, sitting in at lunch counters and, demonstrating against segregated public facilities. And so to apply to a university wasn't, to me, that big of a deal. And eventually, after the 1.5 years, our trial, the university responded, was only about a week long around Christmas time. And so in January 1961, I was at Wayne State University where I was pursuing my journalism, so I didn't lose any time. And I got a call from a reporter from the Associated Press, and she was saying, "How excited are you?" And I said, "About what?" And she said, "Well, the judge has ordered you and Hamilton into the University of Georgia." And I said, "Oh, nobody told me. I guess I better pack." But, I guess it comes from being 19, and I talked when I was here for the Martin Luther King breakfast about the importance of values and the suit of armor that my parents, my neighbors, my teachers and preachers wrapped me in as a very young child. And those values included the notion that although they couldn't give us first-class citizenship, they gave us a first-class sense of ourselves. And so I thought there was no way anybody could tell me or Hamilton, who was brought up in the same way I was, that we weren't as good as anybody else. And so we thought we deserved to be there. When the judge ordered us in, we said, "Okay, we're going." And while I think a lot of the adults were very uneasy because we had to travel through Ku Klux Klan territory and some very reactionary white areas, including Athens itself, where the university is located, we never once felt like stepping back. Even as we were registering for classes and the state got a stay of the order to desegregate, we went to the local friends in a local home there and waited until our lawyers went to Atlanta, 73 miles away, and got an order to get us back in. I went to sleep. I don't know what Hamilton did. I've never even asked him. But I just took a nap. And so I think that somewhere deep in my psyche, I had decided that this was going to be just like any other admission, just like any other ambition, just like any other way to achieve my dream, and I wasn't going to allow it in a way to be a symbolic thing. So I had to feel normal about this, which I really did. Now my body reacted in a slightly different way. My mind was cool. About once a week I went to the infirmary with stomach cramps, and they give me something. I think that was part of the tension because it wasn't a day at the beach by any means.
Well, that wasn't the only burden, was it? I mean, you were able to overcome the courts. You were able to get through that process. But what about what people did to try to convince you to leave? The people who said, you're not supposed to be here. And by the way, I'm saying that in a very kind fashion, I think.
Yeah, right. Well, there was a riot outside of my dormitory the second night after my entry. But again, I talk about that suit of armor. I had a grandmother. My grandfather was the preacher, but my grandmother was the saint. And she used to teach me Bible verses. And one of those that she taught me at the age of 4 or 5 was from the 23rd Psalm, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." And when that mob of angry, hate-filled people were outside of my room, they threw a brick through the window. I just thought of that. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And as I've often said, it was the values of my parents and my grandparents and my community that outfitted me in this suit of armor. Otherwise, I don't know that I would have made it through. I wasn't the only one, of course, going through that. I was admitted in January 61 with Hamilton, and Meredith was admitted to the University of Mississippi, which was far worse than mine. And so there were a lot of us out there on the front lines, and I didn't particularly feel special.